Just needs to be a tad louder.
And Chris, I don't have a formal bio for you, so if there's anything technical, you can tell me. I've known Chris for any number of years. He was working at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. You might know him from some of the great programming he did there, like their History is Lunch series, but you retired last year from the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, moved back home to Water Valley, and is the director of their Main Street program now. Now, Chris has been involved with the Natchez Literary and Cinema Celebration since 2018, heading up our Richard Wright Award Committee. So this is not his first rodeo in Natchez. And Chris will be our facilitator tonight for the panel session. And now I am going to look at my paper for the rest of it. And I'll start on the other end, because I've known Lolly, and I'm not going to say how long I've known Lolly. 30 years maybe. Lolly Rash is the executive director of the Mississippi Heritage Trust. And she's been there since 2013, but I met her 30 years ago when she was working with cultural resources for the city of Biloxi. She has done a lot of things, and I don't even know about all those. But she is a past president of the Mississippi Heritage Trust Board of Trustees and a former fellow with the Knight Program in Community Building. And I was really excited to have Lolly here tonight with us because certainly the question of what is worthy of preserving is part of an interesting aspect of this. Where would Natchez be if we hadn't preserved anything? And that really does affect the stories we tell. Next is Dr. Jody Skipper, who is a race and tourism scholar at the University of Mississippi. I've also known Jody for a number of years. She has also been to Natchez before, was brought here by Visit Natchez a number of years ago. She is a professor of anthropology and Southern Studies and has collaborated with Behind the Big House, a slave dwelling interpretation program in North Mississippi. Specifically, I've seen it in Holly Springs. She has co-edited a book, Navigating South's Transdisciplinary Explorations of a U.S. Region. And then in 2022, she published an autoethnography, Behind the Big House, Reconciling Slavery, Race, and Heritage in the U.S. South. And then the last member of our panel is Dr. Jim Kelly, whom I just met this evening. And so I'm very much looking forward to him. He's a historian and historical interpreter at Whitney Plantation near New Orleans. And it is one of the only museums in the United States dedicated exclusively to the history of slavery and the perspective of the enslaved. Dr. Kelly, I'm not going to go through all of this, he has done a lot of work around the intersections of slavery, public memory, and the Civil War. Sounds like it's right up our alley. His research has been featured in several books, and he has worked on films that have included the MPB, Mississippi's Free State of Jones, television series Mysteries at the Museum, and major motion pictures like The Free State of Jones and Emancipation. And so I believe at this point, I will turn it over to Chris Goodman, and I look forward.
Thank you all for coming out to this. Before we get started, how about we thank Kathleen Bond and her sister Marsha McKenzie, who are the sponsors for this screening and this panel. Thank you both for making it possible. I grew up in North Mississippi. I came to Natchez for the first time 40 years ago or so. It is an amazing town with a deep and rich and broad history. So much of what we know about the Native American cultures in the United States really happened from what we learned here in Natchez. French, Spanish, English, European, African influences throughout the whole thing. And it is a testament to the history of this place that it still generates films like this. Jody, let me start with you and ask, We heard someone mention in the film that the rest of the story begins behind the big house. And the big house program that you've been instrumental in developing really has that goal. Will you talk to us about that?
Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Thanks. So actually, I was teaching a class on Southern Heritage Tourism when I first joined the faculty at the University of Mississippi, and I was thinking about how to think about tourism in the state. For example, blues tourism, civil rights tourism, a lot of conversations around tourism products and then who benefits. And the one thing that I'm mainly interested in is the experiences of enslaved people. That's what I'm trained to study. But I didn't hear much about them in the context of this tourism. Fortunately, through a friend, I met a couple, Chilius Carter and Jennifer Eggleston, who had just started a private tour, a slave dwelling tour in the city of Holly Springs, which is in the hill country in North Mississippi. For those who might not be familiar, Holly Springs has a comical garden club, and in 1932, if I remember correctly, a few of those women came to Natchez to visit, decided that they wanted to do something in Holly Springs similar, and by 1938 had established their own tour, which has been active since. Similarly, enslaved people have been rendered invisible in that tour. So the people that I met decided that they wanted to change that after realizing that the property that they lived on included a slave dwelling. In that year, 2012, my students and I started working collaboratively with them, and we're still doing that today.
Tell us a little bit about what folks see on these tours.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've actually changed quite a bit over time, but if you were to go to the particular program today, and it's a program that we hold once a year in April. It's free and open to the public. This year it will be April 16th through 18th in Holly Springs. And we invite nationally recognized interpreters, folks who have been working on thinking about the experiences of enslaved people for many years. And they interpret those experiences largely through printmaking, the role of laundresses. Also, we have a very famous interpreter, Joe McGill Jr., has been working on thinking about the relationships to slave dwellings or those architectural properties to the antebellum period, colonial period as well. And a colleague of mine and I, Dr. Carolyn Frywall, also think about how archaeological excavations help us to understand something about enslaved people through the material culture that they left behind. And people go through a variety of stations to get these interpretations. And we've been very fortunate in Holly Springs because we've had a pretty significant relationship with the Marshall County schools, and specifically the Holly Springs School District. So we've been having consistently approximately 500 local school students come through the program in a 2-day period. So that's been our primary tour audience.
Jim Barnett is a longtime director of the Historical Properties Division for Archives and History, and a longtime supporter of the Natchez Literary and Cinema Celebration. And Jim said to me pretty early on that what the Department of Archives and History does is it tells people stories. And then I learned from other people like Kim Poole that there is no substitute for the sense of place that you get, that there's no way to tell those stories in a more powerful way than at the site where they took place. Lolly, as the director of the Heritage Trust, you work across the state with folks to save those properties, to preserve those properties. You have to build coalitions to do that. You work with private individuals, you work with corporations, you work with government entities. Talk to us a little bit about the paths that you have to navigate for that, and to save them, despite how much work and money it can be.
It certainly is about coalition building and all sorts of interesting people that come to the table because they get excited about history, the very full, complicated, interesting part that makes us all who we are, makes our communities like Natchez who they are. Mississippi Heritage Trust's mission is to save and renew places meaningful to Mississippians and their history. And we do that through a variety of programs, and one of them is called the 10 Most Endangered Historic Places in Mississippi. And so I saw in this film, Arlington, you saw that ghostly mansion at the end. That's one of the 10 most endangered historic places in Mississippi. We also have Mississippi's Freedom Houses as one of our 10 most endangered sites. And we've been working on a program about Freedom Houses and what they have to say about civil rights and the stories that we have to tell in Mississippi. So what I would say about the film that we saw tonight, it's a film, it's a compressed time period. You got to tell a story. It's very character driven, right? With people that have colorful personalities. But what I see when I come to Natchez is people have been working for a long time to build a heritage tourism economy that benefits everyone and that tells an interesting, full story that's not cookie cutter or one-dimensional. It's complicated and it's fascinating and it's the fun part, right? It's what gets you excited about saving historic places. So definitely about having a lot of people at the table that have different resources, different ideas of how you can reimagine places to meet our needs today.
Jim, you work in part with Whitney Plantation, which has taken a unique position really in the story that it focuses on and what it tells. Talk to us about the work of Whitney Plantation.
Thanks. Yeah, we a little different than the film. We don't talk about the enslavers at all. But somebody asks. It's all focused on the experience of the enslaved people. We start with the millions that were killed on the ground in Africa, and then we talk about the 2 million that died on the way over here on the boats. We talk about the people that were injured and thrown overboard. We talk about the ship that's going down in the squall because it's overloaded with people, and they throw everybody overboard till the ship gets back right again. And we talk about how they get there, and they're forbidden from ever speaking their native languages again, and they try to destroy their cultures. And I can tell you they failed in that, because this culture is alive and well. It's alive and well in our language, in our foodways, in the music that we listen to, and all of these things are contributions that are still with us. They come from Africa. And when I see those big houses, out at Whitney there's a big house, and we go there and all we talk about is the skills of the enslaved people that built the house. And when we talk about the farming, we're talking about an indigo plantation. Indigo was used in the 18th century to make a beautiful blue dye. Blue and purple being the color of royalty is very much in demand, very expensive, and very profitable if you're using enslaved labor. And people say, wow, they bought them and trained them. I know there was a governor last year that interviewed him about slavery, and he said, oh, slavery was so good for people from Africa because of all the skills they learned and all the training they got when they got here. And I point out that the slave ship captains, the instructions to them, I read these all the time, I make them research for Whitney, and they say things like this: go to West Africa, find the indigo growers, find the rice growers, and get those plants, and bring it all back. Because the white enslavers have never seen an indigo plant, nor a rice plant, much less have any idea how to grow. And so those skills, the first cowboys, we talk about the herders from Africa, we talk about the blacksmiths from the Gold Coast, all those skill sets that came into those sugar plantations in South Louisiana. And there's so much money that's made from that. The next time that much wealth will be made like that in the United States per capita was recent. They call it the .com era. So the moral obligation, when I think about Forks of the Road, and I talk about Forks on the Road every tour, I tell them to go to Natchez, because they have a place there finally that recognizes the second largest human auction block in the United States. And so I give a plug to Natchez on my tours every week. But when it comes to the story, we focus on the voices of the enslaved. And right now we're averaging close to 100,000 continent, from every state. People are hungry to hear the truth. And I tell the Christians on the tour, you know, your Jesus said the truth will set you free, so come on and hear it. And they do. And so we have a great time there with that. It's really a community of people. There's a lot of descendants that work on the plantation. Well, my boss is from Senegal, Dr. Ibrahim Masek, and he's taught me so many parables from Africa, including one that I think is fit tonight. It's about the truth. They say you can sit on the truth, you can cover it up, but it's just like a fire. It's going to keep flickering, and it's going to keep burning, and eventually it's going to burn you. And so I'll defer back to you with that.
Pilgrimage is such an interesting word with its religious connotations. So what I wonder, have all of y'all been on pilgrimages of historic houses? And if so, do you remember your early ones that you went to? What did you think? What were they like? What were your experiences early on?
Well, I'm from Biloxi. We have pilgrimage along the coast, and it's about the celebration of homes and gardens and people coming together. I don't know that it's the same kind of pilgrimage that you have in Natchez. It's perhaps not as such a social force. So I've never been to the one here in Natchez, but I do think it is about getting to explore architecture and the stories that building, that the stories are tied to, can tell, right? And the opportunity to tell full stories like you do behind the big house as part of a whole. That's what makes it interesting.
I didn't know what a pilgrimage was per se until I got to the state of Mississippi. I grew up in southern Louisiana, where they've done a pretty good job of masking the contributions of enslaved people more broadly, but also African Americans into the contemporary period. And I say this because I grew up in southern Louisiana in the 1970s and 1980s, where the state had just embarked on this Cajun cultural renaissance. And what that meant was white Cajun cultural renaissance. So that means that I watched the film on Belisaire the Cajun, I read books about Clovis the Crawfish, and I went to Acadian Village. It's as if black people didn't exist. So I think that's probably the most comparable thing that I had until I actually went to Holly Springs on their pilgrimage for the first time. And I have to say that I had been to many plantation sites prior to this because I studied slavery tourism. But I visited the Holly Springs pilgrimage after working with Behind the Big House, so I had a sense of what to expect, and I just have to say overall my experience was not surprising, but it was disheartening.
I haven't been to the pilgrimage here, but I've been to the houses here. And, you know, I was kind of taken aback when they tell me there's a servant's house. I said, you mean the enslaved people's house? And in Louisiana, there's the Whitney Plantation, and then right down the road is Oak Alley. And so it's a different crowd that goes to Oak Alley. They want to hear about the marble from Italy and the lineage of the white masters. And so it's a totally different story.
And so that was something that was touched on in the film, the idea that different generations, different age groups, and different groups of people have different interests in what they want to hear about on the tours. Do y'all find that to be the case when y'all are on this?
Well, you know, they kind of self-select because it's a slavery museum, so they kind of know what they're getting into. But every now and then, you know, somebody will realize they're on the wrong tour. And they find out real quick because I start right out of the bat. There's no holds barred. And so, you know, there's a checkpoint. I say, okay, I ask everybody, you think you're on the right tour? Because if you're not, you can go back and get your money back right now. But if you think you are, we're locked in now. We're going on. You're going to pay at this point. So But there's some people that come that are in tears. There's some people that come that are angry. There's some that have guilt. I can't tell you the confessionals I've heard from white people and black people after the tour, because most people have never heard the story of slavery, the true story of slavery. And when they hear it, and when you're out there on the ground, you're walking in the steps they walked in, and you know this is where Anna was, and you know this is where Celia was, and they sold her 4 children away from her, each one of them individually to another owner, as she's screaming and they're holding her down. It hits hard, and it kind of gets real then. So, but you know, it's like you do what you do.
I've had very similar experiences in Holly Springs. I think that the thing that's most encouraging is that with our school groups, we tend to have students from kindergarten to high school, and then family groups outside of that. And we've had situations where we've intersected behind the big house at the same time as the Garden Cups pilgrimage, and we've had those folks from the pilgrimage who've come who realized they were on the wrong tour and didn't stay. We've also had many more who did, and I think that it really reflects how important it is, and you've seen this with folks like Reverend Collins and also Scobie in the film, and Deb Cozy, who have the emotional bandwidth and intellectual capacity to share these stories. This is a skill set. This is not something that everyone should be doing or knows how to do, but we work very hard to create a group of people who can do that, so that folks who might not be ready somehow can be at least critically facilitated through that process. This is psychological work. We consult a psychotherapist because we've had to. We're not psychologists, but we really try not to do more harm than good. But the reality is that this work is going to be uncomfortable for people.
So how do you think that the groups, the folks involved, the private individuals, what are the responsibilities of telling these broader stories that are a more full and accurate approach to history?
Why wouldn't you? That's my question. Because that is part of all of our history. If you get excited about history, you get excited about all of it. It's not one or the other. It's part of not putting on blinders or making a pretense that something happened or didn't happen. It's part of getting excited about learning what's important in this town, you know?
I think that the responsibility is not to think of it as history, but realize that it's who we are in the present, and I think that's what's very difficult for people. And I think that it's pretty evident in the film that when Reverend Collins is giving the tour to a group, that the group seems receptive until he starts to talk about contemporary segregation, and then you see a complete disconnect at that point. They're comfortable in the past, but the present impacts of the past are what render people very uncomfortable. So one thing that we had to do early on in Holly Springs, I shouldn't say had to, but I think that maybe we felt like we did, was actually start a racial reconciliation group to help us to think about what it means to be doing that work in the present, why you have a majority black population in Holly Springs, but a majority black population in poverty, in terms of numbers and demographics, still comparable to the numbers of enslaved people in the year 1860. Those things aren't a coincidence. So these are the things that we've really had to spend a lot of time thinking about. I also think that people don't do it because it's hard internal work. You have to work on yourself before you decide to tell these stories to other people. And I don't think that folks necessarily understand that. Otherwise, after working with young children, they pick up on a lot pretty quickly. So you have to be ready for that kind of thing. 'Cause. 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 'Cause.
you know, the legacies, the slavery is one thing, but then when we get into the legacies of slavery, and we start talking about the convict lease system, sharecropping, and in Whitney they had the plantation store, where you paid coupons into the 20th century because they don't want you to get any money because they know you'll go buy a bus ticket and get the heck out of there. And so it's another form of slavery. Sharecropping is another that goes on to the 20th century. And they mentioned Isaac Franklin here. He founded Angola prison. It's not an accident it's called Angola prison because it was Angola plantation. Before it was the prison. And right now at Angola prison, the incarcerated population runs about 70% people of color, even though they only make up 30% of the state's population. And so when I think about that, I'm not one of these people that says we don't need prisons. I figure there's people that need to be in prison. But when I look at the statistics, I realize it goes right back to slavery. The modern prison system goes right back to the convict lease system. It's a way to make money off of people of color. And when I talk about the slave patrols that they had, you know, people of color are out on the road, the slave patrols are coming, and they're looking for proper papers. Does that sound familiar? People out on the road are in cities in the United States in 2026 looking for people of color without their proper papers or with their proper papers. Well, it's just like it was back then. There's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars being made all of that. The prison system, ICE, detention camps, et cetera, et cetera. So we're talking about slavery, but we're talking about 2026 too. When I talk about the child mortality rate in Louisiana on a plantation like Whitney, they're horrified. And then when I tell them the child mortality rate right now in Louisiana is about the same as it was during the days of slavery, they're even more shocked. And this is just like right off the top.
Joe, you mentioned that you can't just jump into this. It's not something that everyone can do. What are some of the resources that are available to help folks who are interested in that sort of work?
That's a good question. I guess you can jump in it. People do all the time, but you probably shouldn't. I think there aren't many resources, unfortunately, but there are more than there were when I started doing this about 15 years ago. There are organizations like Coming to the Table that's rooted in Eastern Mennonite University, and a lot of the folks who helped to start that organization are white descendants of some of our founding fathers who started to try to connect to some of the descendants of the folks that our founding fathers enslaved, many who are their biological relatives. And you saw this a lot, for example, with Thomas Jefferson's descendants, white descendants who really struggled to connect to the African Americans. A few of those white descendants decided to help start this group, and they're descendants of the Wolf family in Rhode Island and many other. But what they've done is set the standard for having really critical, uncomfortable conversations around these things. And there was a documentary that came out of this, also several textbooks that are guides. One of those is Interpreting Slavery in Museums and Historic Sites. And I talked about the psychological part of that, and that book I see as a handbook that does a really good job of talking about the psychology of doing this kind of work, but also in terms of the emotional labor. That's one thing you can visibly see, the emotional labor that Reverend Collins is dealing with in this film. It's palpable, but there's also some emotional work going on the part of the tourists who are going through learning crisis at the times, and you can see this if they're, changing their particular demeanors, hanging their heads. So you have to be able to understand how to read those things so that you can know how to respond to people, and books like that help you.
Yeah, we're working on that right now. We're looking at bringing in a person full time to help the interpreters, but also the guests that get overcome with emotion, because it's hard. It's hard for a lot of people to look at. But when I think about what some of them are doing, you mentioned something like this. enslavers I have on my tour. And I had a lady last week who's looking for names, and I've helped her find some of the names of the enslaved people. And for every name that she finds, she's looking for the descendants, and if she can't find the descendants, she gives the descendants money if she can find them. If she can't, she gives the money to black organizations.
Jody had mentioned a moment that sort of stood out to her. I wonder, you know, if you could each think about maybe a moment in the movie that stuck with you or struck you in one way or another.
Well, it's something I already knew, but I think of Kathleen's, I don't know, they gave a year, how many years, 150 years, that she's been tilting at bureaucratic windmills to establish forks in the road and help tell that story. And I mean, I guess I always knew about that, but like to watch the film and see the actual clash between why it's not happening and the personalities involved and the long-term thinking to get to a point where you can have the story tied back to that place, that was something that I didn't really understand fully until this film.
There were several things for me that I think that this time I've watched it, I really started to listen to people's language, maybe in a way that I haven't before. And I was thinking about Tracy in the beginning, talking about the early history of the Garden Club. And one thing that she said was, ladies, go clean your houses. Are they cleaning their own houses? So when you make statements like that, you're really focusing on, in many ways, and it might be subconsciously, but still seeming intentional, that black folks don't matter or that they don't exist in the narrative. And you see that pretty consistently through the film. There's also a woman who says that all black girls in Natchez wore hoop skirts. All black girls in Natchez wore hoop skirts. You know, it doesn't have to be an intentional use of the N-word to be offensive. Pretending that you don't exist is very offensive. And I really like that the filmmakers were able to do that. I think the third example is that with the two couples on the porch who talked about wanting to go back to a happier time. Happier time for whom? That wasn't even happier for women, only for relatively wealthy white men. So the fact that these disconnects are so evident just in pretty normal language is pretty striking.
That part struck me too. The fact that they talk about the cotton made the money. I kind of found that interesting. It could have been anything. It was the enslaved people that made the money. And so when I think about those skills once again, and I think about that person saying that it was like going back to a happy time, they really don't understand the context of what they're talking about. So the language matters, words matters, and it mattered then, it matters now more than ever.
We wanted to leave time for questions from the audience before we open it up for everyone, though. I want to lift up the name of Seth Oxley for the work that he's done over the last decades and decades here in Natchez. He's a talented figure. Are there any people in the audience, though, who were in the film? If you'd stand up and raise your hand and let us recognize you. If anyone does have a question, you can raise your hand. We've got a couple of microphones that we'll bring to you.
It's on? Okay, thanks. Listening to the various phases that you had to go through to get the community to be supportive of preservation and rethinking the stories and things of that nature, do you have kind of a map that can give us some sense of what we can expect from a community that doesn't seem to want to do this. So how do you convince the council people, because this is all about getting the funding? How do you, or did you have to run into that problem? Was everyone agreeable, or did you have to bring them on board? Because in most of these communities, the funding, federal funding not necessarily, but CDBG funds, things of that nature are all tied into politics. So the question is, how can just regular people, we can get it to a certain phase, I can get it to the point where they can't tear it down because we have it on the local register, but now how can we move it forward? And do you have any suggestions for that, or do you have, you said you had like a book that talked about that? I'm definitely going to get the name of it, but I think that's one of the biggest problems in communities, is to get people, especially when you're not born and raised there, okay? They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about slavery. They don't want to talk about Reconstruction. They don't want to talk about it. Anything that points to having a conversation about it is very quickly muted. So we have plenty of older buildings that need to be saved, but it's getting the community, particularly the politicians and others, to get on board with that. If you have any suggestions, that would help.
I'm not sure that I can speak to the historic preservation piece in terms of the buildings. That's more for Lolly, but I can say in our case, what really happens is that, and this is not necessarily something I would approve of on a normal basis, but I work with two white people who didn't ask permission. And so they basically decided, we're going to do this, and they started to do it. They got small grants, but very significant grants from the Mississippi Humanities Council that they continue to consistently get, fortunately, to do the program one time each year. Getting Black people on board is very difficult. Getting white folks on board, especially those who are the descendants of people who enslaved in Holly Springs, is also very difficult. At the same time, there were people who were very willing to work, and those are the people that we started with. And what happened is actually, I think maybe 3 Black people came the first year, reluctantly came, but they did. And then one local Black woman came, and she had grown up in Marshall County, was very familiar with the pilgrimage there, and you know, was kind of came with this, what are these white people doing now attitude. And she came back the next year with 400 students. And it's not, I'm not saying that if you build it, people will come. That's not necessarily the truth. But people who are ready to do some work sometimes will, even if you start at a small scale. It's very difficult to continue to sustain. Our program has been a miracle every year, but folks really just didn't ask permission. They just did. And sometimes there are consequences to that. It just happened to work in this case.
I'm gonna give a really kind of dorky answer, historic preservation dorky answer. It's to know the stories, right? And here in Natchez, I know the Historic Natchez Foundation has worked really hard to document outbuildings, and a very extensive survey and work with Tulane University to do modeling of outbuildings. So even having that knowledge in a survey or a study, that there you can use that to educate people to do more robust, telling the full story tours. It's a starting point.
I would just add, I don't know how this would relate here in Natchez, but I mentioned Oak Alley earlier. Since Whitney's been there, Oak Alley's narrative has shifted a little bit more to the truth, as other surrounding plantations have. They're still a long way away from the full dose, but at least they're getting there. And so I think financially, for us at least, truth works, because people are literally knocking down the door to hear it.
Yeah, I think I'm next. So the copyright date on this film was 2025. Presumably, it went into production in 2024, maybe even longer. I know these things take time, what is the status of the Fork in the Road project in the current climate? I mean, this is a federal project, and I mean, you know, you can't even, I mean, they took Jackie Robinson off the Army website, for God's sake. I mean, so like, how is that affecting, and maybe that's more of a question for you than, I'd love to know.
Thank you, Dr. Kerner. So, we're moving forward. Slowly, under the radar, but they have not stopped the funding for land acquisition, so we continue to acquire property. There is a large church that sits in the center of the property, and the local congregation at the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses are very enthusiastic about our project. And their governing board in New York has made the decision that they sold the property to us last year. They have a 1-year lease while they build their new church. And so they will be out before summer. And we will begin planning programming in that building this summer. And our first programming is planned for July, because the 13th of July is when the Union Army moved south from Vicksburg and came ashore and began enforcing the Emancipation Proclamation. So that is our freedom story for 2026. But we're, you know, we still may be 10 years away from full development, but we're moving forward. That's it.
I tried to resist, but I couldn't do it. So, as a native Natchezian, 6th generation, I have come to terms with the fact that I'm descended from not only cotton planters, but also human traffickers. And that's part of my family's narrative. You just can't say one part of it without the other. And you know, slaveholder is one word, but let's call it what it is. It was human trafficking, and that was part of how they made their wealth. Also, I am a filmmaker who's worked for 30 years in the museum industry. And this is my second time seeing Susanna Herman's film, and I applaud her narrative, her production values, the editing, the music. It's beautifully done. I also applaud the way the story builds. It comes to this crescendo at the end with this really uncomfortable, revelation. As she goes along, there are many really funny moments that I don't think were maybe intended to be funny, but they were. But I also think it's important, and this is really what I wanted to say, that we recognize that the film is about tourism. It's about the stories that we tell our visitors. And there's a whole world here in Natchez that has nothing to do with that. There's the world and the work that those of us who have lived here for generations and who love this town have been doing. I'll put my mother, who's deceased, I'll put her in that category. I'll put, many people that I know in that category. The work that we're doing, you can call it racial reconciliation, you can call it digging up the truth, you can call it coming to terms with who we are. But the work that we're doing is not about tourism, it's about us, it's about our community. Many of you might not know that we have a $24.57 million grant to transform what we call the Forks to Freedom corridor. It's the gateway to Natchez. And it puts our African American story at the front and center. of who we are. So that is not a tourism product. That is the result of a master planning process that began in 2015 and was funded by the citizens of Natchez. There was a public-private partnership with the city, and the citizens came together and raised the money to bring in a consulting team and really put us through the paces. And so there is a master plan, a vision for who we're going to be and how we're going to present ourselves, not just to the tourists, but to each other. And if you were to come to some of these community engagement events, you'd see a racially diverse group like this. And it was commented on by the consultants recently at a public meeting that we recently had, that they had not attended an engagement session like that, where it was racially diverse, everybody seemed to know each other, everybody was glad to see each other, and everybody seemed to be of one mind. Looking to the future with a passion for being the best we could be. Now that's my experience. That's my on-the-ground experience in Natchez. And I just wanted to put that out there to remind all of us, many of whom are involved in this process, that we are doing work together. And it has to do with our community and not just with tourism. Not to take anything away from Susanna's film, which is great, but there are many of us who are doing this other work that is important. And I'll say one more thing. We had a guy named Joe Borgstrom come 2 years ago to talk to us about, really marketing, retail studies, that kind of thing. And he said, if you create a community, or downtown specifically is what he was talking about, you create a downtown that tourists love, your community will hate it. You create a town that the community loves, and your tourists will love it. So anyway, that's my contribution, and thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you all. There's an organization that two people in this community have started 30 years ago. And it's in the hood. And they got 2 houses that were going to be torn down, and they made them into a learning center and a performing arts center for the children that were basically throwaway children. And for the past 30 years, they don't have money, but they've helped all these kids go to college, and all these kids got married and they got jobs, and then they come back here. They did have to move away because there's not a lot of work here, but this couple have done so much. And the name of their group is D&J Youth Group. And you can find it on Natchez, and they're doing wonderful work for these children still, and they're up in their years, and something is happening as a result. They've had hundreds of kids go through this program that this little mom and pop have done. And if you need any more information, please ask me. I'd be glad. We're trying to raise funds all the time to continue the progress as we age, and hope that there are some younger people getting interested. So I think that this is enlightenment for our world. Something like this in a neighborhood like where they are, and it's possible. And I just thank y'all for your attitude and looking towards a better future for our children. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm a husband. I just want to say this, that in Jackson, the youth, according to older black individuals who live in Jackson, there's a lack of male heroes, male models, as they better word. And they don't have that. And that's what we're talking about. My feeling is, and I've lived in Louisiana, I know South Carolina, graduated from the university, et cetera, et cetera. And here, the point is that the youth today, I don't think they really care about listening to the gripes of the history. And they are aware of it. What they really want is just a freaking chance to make money, to live a life. And so many things are against them. Certainly in Jackson, I've seen that. I don't know what the city structure is in the city, but more has to be done in that way. And maybe they're doing it already. I don't know. I don't go to Jackson. I have no reason to. But I just want to say that it may be lovely to go back and see a lot of these things from both sides. I really thought the movie tonight was going to be about Natchez in the 1960s, when the force of integration was brought out by National Guard, as I recall. I remember seeing the photograph, probably from the Democrat. This wasn't from the newspaper that I was looking at, but it was some program. And it was very interesting, but I mean, beyond that, it was very sad, let's put it that way. But it had to be done evidently. But what we tried tonight was people talking about the past. And I really underline the fact that the youth is more concerned with now and where they're going, or the chance to be going. The situation in Jackson is pretty rough. Pretty rough. There was a television program, documentary I saw about a week or so ago. 25 of the worst crime places in America. And Mississippi didn't have any until you got to number one. Already they had branded the state of Louisiana, the state of Arkansas, the state of Alabama, all among the top 5 or 10, whatever, criminal situations. Not one from Mississippi. And then they said number one, the city of Jackson, Mississippi. So I really think that's a focal point. Maybe, we need help here at Denver, but on a personal basis, I get along with a lot of people at the health club and so forth, and I see a lot of potential in the younger people who work there. Let's put it that way. And I thank you for your time.
Maybe time for one last question? Yeah.
Yes, I just was going to ask the panel their opinion on this. You know, it's very important often to tell the whole story rather than part of the story. I think you would all agree with that. And I noticed, I don't know if it was by mistake or by choice, that we have a national park here in town called William Johnson, which was a black barber who went to the forks of the road and bought slaves. And there were other black businessmen in Natchez who owned slaves. Why was that left out as not giving the whole story? And do you think that was by choice, or was that just an oversight? Thank you.
I think that's probably a better question to the filmmakers. I will say that there are plenty of films about William Johnson that deal with all that. But I'm happy to hear anybody else weigh in on that who may want to. I'd love to get ready to come up and welcome everybody, remind everybody of what's going on tomorrow, but just a few minutes, if I may, for folks who have not been to Whitney, for folks who have not been to Holly Springs and the Big House, and folks who want to know more about and support the work that the Mississippi Heritage Trust does. Could you each maybe just give a couple of minutes of how they can see what you're doing and support you?
Mississippi Heritage Trust was founded in 1992 to save and renew places meaningful to Mississippians and their history. Our website is mississippiHeritage.com. I have 2 board members here tonight, Brian Rutledge and Rob Gray, so thank you for being here. And Kimball Poole, one of our founding members, was here earlier we have a wonderful network of historic preservation enthusiasts, passionate people who want to save places and repurpose them. And here in Natchez, you have the Historic Natchez Foundation, which is not only just a gem in our state, it's a model nationwide for how to save and repurpose historic places. So Ron and Mimi Miller are tremendous heroes in my book, and we love having Carter to carry that forward.
So for more context, how work in Holly Springs, you can go to behindthebighouse.org. For information on the upcoming program, you can search Behind the Big House Mississippi on Facebook. And also to learn more about my specific experiences working with the program, you can look for my book, Behind the Big House.
Google Whitney Plantation and find the locations in Wallace, out on the German coast, the first German coast, and come and take a visit. I'm out there on Wednesdays. The other 4 days of the week, I'm looking at my computer screen in 18th and 19th century documents, and so when they let me out around live breathing people on Wednesdays, I tend to talk a whole lot, because I go home and try to tell my wife, and she says, you need to go give a tour. I've already heard all this. But to answer the gentleman's question back there, I'm not sure what the filmmakers had in mind, but that's one of the oldest tropes that I can remember about enslavement. When I was growing up, this was before when I was learning about slavery in grade school and high school, and I thought slavery was kind of bad on one hand, and then the way they described it to me, I thought it was really good on another hand. And that was before I learned that the textbooks I was reading from and learning from were written by the former enslavers and the former Confederates. And then when I learned that, it all kind of made sense. And it's a great book about that. James Lowen, Lies, my teacher taught me. I don't like the name of that book because it's not the teacher's fault, it's the textbook's fault and how those things happen. But come to Whitney and you'll hear the real story.
Your background and why you care so much about what you do. So thank you so much. All right, so we are about to dismiss. We'll be back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. We are going to hit 3 big things tomorrow. Women's suffrage, first thing in the morning. Whoop, whoop. Then we're going to do Native American code talking. We have the foremost expert on Native American code talking in the United States. It's going to be here discussing his book, so y'all come and meet him. And then in the afternoon, we are going to move into civil rights and do that. We have a banquet with Dr. Gloria J. Brown Marshall, who is a legal commentator, a playwright. She has been on CNN, NPR, BBC, WVON, literally all the letters. She's been on there. And it's a big deal that she's here in Natchez. So join us for our banquet tomorrow night. Tickets are $45 a person. You can purchase them at the door, or you can purchase them at colin.edu/NLCC. Thank you so much, and y'all have a great night.
All right, Mary.
Have no idea. Take this stuff down.
I gotta get some stuff out of there. I gotta get a 50-footer out of there.
Natchez don't really need a mayor as long as you got the president or the garden club. And the garden club runs the city. I call them the blue-haired mafia.
Most people don't understand what our garden clubs really are. They're preservation organizations, and we owe Stanton Hole and Ron Hewitt and maintain.
gotta what?
I gotta take the computer and the camera back over there.
This right here?
Oh, that's awesome, yeah.
Yeah, he brought it over.
That's good. All right, so it's working now.
So that particular one was very
Good, awesome.
No buzz,
No buzz now. Wish we could have got that. All right, man. I'm taking the computer and the camera back over there, and then I'm done. I'll turn the lights off in that room. I am done in this room.
That's your soundboard film?
Yeah.
You gonna leave your camera on?
No, I gotta turn it off.